In this video, we are going to learn about how to do global state management or app level state management using Redux. In particular, we are going to use a particular package, Redux toolkit, which is built on top of Redux to do our global app level state management. Okay, so firstly, let's see our current setup. Our current setup is a home page and a few routes, user routes. So you can see this user 1, user 2, and home page is there. This we already did using your React router. Right now we are going to add Redux into the mix. For that, let's install a few packages. We'll install Redux toolkit, which is at redux.js/toolkit, and React Redux. These two packages let's install. When we install this, then we will see that in the dependencies these two will be added. Okay, so once they are added, you can see actually that we have not directly installed Redux package, but it will be installed automatically. You can check that Redux package is also added, because actually that is a peer dependency. No, that is a dependency of Redux toolkit only. Okay, so you can see here also, if you go to npmjs.com and you type Redux.js toolkit, then you can see that one of the dependencies of Redux toolkit is Redux, which means that this package is a wrapper, is another library built on top of Redux and a few other packages. And the purpose of this is to simplify the syntax. Actually, earlier when we used to use Redux, and current code also, if you currently also on Stack Overflow or somewhere you see old code, then you'll see that they directly use Redux and React Redux. However, the earlier syntax was slightly more cumbersome and difficult to use. They have simplified the syntax somewhat, and the recent most stable way of using Redux is using this package, Redux toolkit, which is again, as I said, it is a wrapper around the base package Redux to simplify the syntax. So we'll go directly with this only, which is the standard nowadays. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing, so let's start. Okay, the first thing we are going to do is that once we have started, then you can see that right now nothing will happen, because we have just installed Redux and Redux toolkit, but we are not doing anything with it, right? So the first thing we are going to do is that we will create a state. We will create a place where different states can be managed. For that, let's create a folder called store. Okay, and inside store folder, let's create another file. Let's call it you can call it index.js, or I'll just call it store.js. Okay, and this will have essentially the core of the app level store. Okay, the first thing we are going to do is that we will install import a function called create slice. So you can see that from at Redux toolkit, you can see that they have a particular function called create slice. Okay, now using this create slice, you can create a piece of state. So we'll see that we can have multiple pieces of states, but this will be one of the pieces of state. So let's create a counter sort of variable, which we can, let's say, increment or decrement, as we did in the earlier video. Here also let's try to do that. So let's do something like this, const, and we are going to create a slice. Let's name it something. So let's name it counter slice. Okay, and then we will call this function create slice. But this create slice takes an object as an argument, and we have to pass here something. The first thing, we are going to pass name, and let's call it simple counter. Okay, so counter slice, the name is counter. Next is initial state. Initial state, let's have an object called with attributes, let's say key count, and its initial value is 0. So this object is essentially the initial state. Okay, Next, we are also going to pass some reducers. Okay, so we'll come back to reducers. So there is something called reducers and we have to pass something here. So for right now, let's simply comment it. We'll come back to it. But let's firstly see how to use this counter slice. So this counter slice, what we do is that we generally we have to create store. Okay, so what we do is that there is another function from here which you can export called configure store. Okay, this configure store, what it does is that it creates a store. So you can create a store, configure store. So earlier you will see something like create store, and create store was generally import from Redux package and so, but now that way is deprecated. The latest and the most stable way is using this function called configure store, which you can directly import from Redux toolkit, and then we have to pass a reducer. And that reducer is what? Reducer is something, the slice, you have to write the slice dot reducer. So this is how the way it is. So now you have created store. Now you simply export it. So let's export default store. Okay, so I have created store and I have exported it. Now, so you understand, firstly we create a slice. We use that slice to create a store using configure store function, and then once we have a particular store, we export it. Why we export it? Because next we are going to use this store to initialize our application with this initial state. Okay, that we are going to do inside index.js. So index.js, what you can do is that you can do something like this. You can import from here. We are going to use the package, another package we installed, which is React Redux. From this provides a JSX element called provider. Okay, so we will, so like browser router was exported by React Router DOM, similarly this sort of provider is exported from React Redux, and this also we will wrap around our existing app structure. So everything, this thing is there, this we will wrap around this thing. So let's wrap around it. So let's wrap it. So this whole thing we have wrapped around provider, which was exported from React Redux. But this is not done. What just now we created this store, right? We have to use this store and pass it inside provider, and that we can do it like this. So let's simply import that. So import store from store. So dot slash store slash store, and this store will work because this we exported default export default we did, so we can simply import it directly rather than restructuring, and that we are going to use it like store is equal to store. Okay, so whatever the store we imported, there's a particular key called store, and in that prop named store we have to pass this store which we just imported. Okay, so now basically the support for Redux is done, right? But still we have not used it anywhere, and that's why we will not see any changes, but essentially we have added the support. So let's see, in order to use the global application state, so let's start with this count thing which we just mentioned in the initial state. In order to use this, let's go inside our home page. So this is currently our home page. Let's use here this counter variable count. Okay, so what we can do is that here we have to import a couple of things. The first thing we have to import is from React Redux. From React Redux, we need to firstly import something called use selector. Okay, so use selector, this we can use it inside our function component, and we can use it like let's say counter is equal to use selector. Okay, and then here we have to pass a function like state arrow state dot count. you see what is this. So this is the initial state, right? So what part of state you want to select, that is what the meaning of use selector is. This what part of state I want to extract the count variable. So that's what you say, that you return state.count, which means that the count part of state I want to select. So that thing comes inside this counter. Okay, and now if you print this counter, then you will see that you get this 0. Why you get this 0? Because here you passed 0. If you pass 10, then you will get 10. And you could have named it anything. You could have named it this count also. So that is fine. Okay, that is fine. But let's name it counter only. But you understand the actual data is inside count variable, but I'm calling it counter inside the place where I'm using it. So that is fine. Now let's keep it 0 only for now. So this state initial, this is global state, which means that you can understand that this thing is home component. This is somewhere else. Okay, this count data, this thing is application wide available. You can understand that home is a completely different component, and there also it is available. Not only that, if you want to use it on some other page, so let's say this user page, there also you can use the same thing. So I can, in a similar way, I can have a use selector. Okay, and then in a similar manner I can select that particular count, and then I can use counter here also. So you can see that now in user page also I have, in home page also I have this counter. So you can see that this clearly shows that this data, this piece of data which is counter, is present application wide. So if it is 10, then you can see that on user page also it is 10, on home page also it is 10. So this data 10 is global, application wide. So that's what we mean, and that's why we are using Redux for that. Because if we use some local state, so use state or something we do inside home, then that piece of data is only available inside this component. But this data is application wide. But this is not much interesting, because we just have some static data and we are using accessing that somewhere, like multiple pages, anywhere in multiple pages, or even in a single page multiple components are there. Then across the components we can use this global data. But the more interesting thing would be something where I change this piece of data. I should be able to change this piece of data. So let's say I am on home page, and let's change it back to 0 for now. Let's say I'm on home page, and this 0 I make it to 1 or 2, and then I go back to, and this thing is changed everywhere, which means that I go back to user page, then the data is updated here also. So that is what we want to do. So we want to update it. Okay, so let's see how to do that. The first thing we'll try to do is that when we created store, okay, then here I was saying that time that we have something called reducers. Okay, so this is the place where the actual part of updating the state is going to happen. Okay, in this reducers, this is essentially an object. Here you can define some functions. So let's define a function called incr, which is essentially to increment this count. So for that we have defined this. Okay, and what happens that this gets passed two things. One is state and another is action, and both of them you might not always use, but definitely the first one you will always use. Because what happens is that any type of modification which you are trying to do, so let's say I want to increment, so which means that state is equal to state plus 1. Let's say this I want to do, and you know that this in shortcut I can write something like in plus equal to operator. Okay, so we are incrementing state by 1. State is equal to state plus 1. This we are doing. But this support for increment is added. But actually how do we actually use this? How do we invoke this? This happens. For that we have to use something called dispatcher. Okay, so this is a new concept. So like use selector, there is something called use dispatch. Okay, and if you call that, then you get a an object called a dispatch. So you can use dispatch, Okay, now you have got this thing called dispatch, but how to use this? You have to use this something like this. So essentially let's use only increment for now. So let's say there is a button, and that button, on the on click of that, you call a function. So right now definitely this function is called, but nothing is happened. So you can see that on home I have this button, I click on this, then nothing is happening, just this log is happening. That is fine. What I want to do is that when I click on this button, then I want to increment this counter by 1. So let's say 0 becomes 1, I click again, this one should become 2, so something like that. What happens is that where you are handling this, so on click handler is this function, wherever you are handling this function, what you have to do is that you can use this dispatch, and you have to pass an action inside this. And what is this action? This action you have to export from your store. Okay, so let's export it. So export const actions is equal to, the slice has something called actions. So let's say counter slice dot actions. You export this. So when you export a slice's actions, then this increment or whatever, you can multiple functions also you can declare here, but all those, so in this case only one function incr is there, that action will be available inside this actions object. So essentially I have renamed it to just actions, and that I have exported, which means that I can definitely import it from here. So import, and import actions from store/store. Okay, so you can see that. Okay, so let's comment dispatch. I'm just trying to show you what is this actions. Okay, so let's simply print this actions dot, let's say incr. Okay, so what is this incr? Let's print that. So when you click that, then you see that there's something called action creator is printed. So essentially this is a function. You can see that this is a function. So whatever you are printing, this is a function. When you call this function, then you get an action. So this might be confusing. This actions is actually not an action. Actions contains functions which are called action creators, and when you call that, then you get actions. And what is that actions? When you so now I have called it. So when I print, so now essentially this action creator is called, and when it is called, then there is something called action is created. What is an action? Action is just a plain and simple object which has two things, type and payload. And if you see earlier or somewhat older code of Redux, then you will see that generally earlier you manually generally you were creating this sort of object, and you were manually dispatching it like this. But right now we don't do this. When we call this actions dot incr, then automatically you can see that this sort of action is created for us, and directly we take this and pass this. You can see directly we take this and pass it. So simply I have logged it just to show you that what is this we are passing. We are passing an object, simply an object, but that object is a special object, and that's why it is called action, because that special object called action has attributes type and payload. Type is compulsory, it will always be there. Payload is optional, and payload will only be passed when you pass this when you call this function with some data. Okay, so let's comment this for now. So right now you can see that when I click, then this payload is undefined. Let's say I pass 100 here. Okay, and now I click, then you can see that this payload is 100. So essentially, if you need, right now we don't need it because we already know that I want to increment it by 1, then I don't. But let's say you are creating a special function where you want to increment it by 10 or 20, then you have to say that thing. So that will go in payload, so that wherever you are handling this action, there you can see that what is the data on which I want to operate on. Right now it is not needed, so you can see that if I don't pass anything, it will be simply undefined. So that is fine. But the interesting thing is that when this type is there, counter inc, right, and then you pass this sort of thing here, Now after that, when you click and this is dispatched, then this action is dispatched, then the control comes in the store, and here the thing is run. So actually you can see that counter slash incr, right? So this counter slash incr is basically means that go inside counter slice, inside counter slice go to incr reducer. So you understand, if I rename this to something else, so let's say slice 1 or something, then my thing which will be printed here, so let's print it here. Okay, so you can see that now the thing will be printed slice 1 slash incr, right? So you can understand that what is happening, whatever is the name here, that says that go inside that slice, go to that reducer. So you can see that counter slash incr, so I'm going inside that reducer, and when I dispatch this action, so let's keep it for just logging purpose. When I dispatch this action, then what happens, that this thing is called. If you want to prove it, you can simply log it here something, so let's say dot dot dot, and you can see that when I click, then you can see that this dot 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 is printed, which means that this action is dispatched. Means I have to call the reducer corresponding to that action. The reducer corresponding to that action we have already defined here, and this is called. Now what do I do? So you can see that the one thing which I want to do is that I want to simply increment the state. Okay, so I have incremented the state. Okay, so I have incremented the state here by 1. But when we are doing state plus 1, then you can see that this is not increasing, and that is because we have done some mistake here. So see, you can see that firstly let's see what is state. So state is an object. It's not that you can simply increment an object. You have to particularly, you can see that state is internally an object where it maintains. So this is a proxy because there is some immutable library called immer which is used inside. So in earlier versions of when we generally don't use to use a Redux toolkit, then there was a rule that it should be a pure component and you cannot modify state or something like this. First of all, we are not able to modify state. We have to modify state.count. Firstly this. Secondly, what is this? This simply means that state.count is equal to state.count plus 1, but this was not allowed in the earlier pattern. Okay, in the earlier pattern you earlier had to return the new data rather than modifying the data. But people were making mistakes in that pattern. So now actually you can modify, and Redux toolkit will automatically take care inside that what you have modified using some library, immutable data structure library called immer. But that we don't have to get inside. The plain and simple thing is that if you, so this is equivalent to this thing, isn't it? If you modify, then automatically Redux will take care of it. So first of all, simply state plus equal to 1. Okay, so first of all, we don't have to we don't have to increment state, rather we have to increment what data inside state you want to increment. Okay, so state.count, I want to increment it by 1. So that is what we are doing. And now you can see clearly that if I click on 1, if I click, then it gets incremented. Okay, so that is fine. And now we have understood the pattern. So the same thing what we are doing here, we can do it again like this also. So let's say we are doing handle, instead of handle increment, we are doing handle decrement. Okay, so instead of handle increment, we are doing handle decrement, and let's create another action inside here called, let's say, decrement. Okay, so let's call it decrement, and in this case we are just going to decrement it. Okay, action we are not using right now. Right now let's firstly delete this. Let me show you what this action is. So I'll print this action here. So log let's print this action. Let's comment this for now. I'll just uncomment it for now. Okay, so you'll see that when you do decrement, then you have to call this decrement function, okay, decrement action. And again, this will be like simply counter slash incr type. This will be counter slash decr type of what? Type of action which is going to be dispatched from here. Now you can see that I have two buttons. If I click on this, it increments. If I click on this, then it decrements. Okay. Now this I was trying to show you that if I increment, then let's print this action. So I was saying you that you can see that I am not using action here. Also I am not using action. But what is this action? This action is exactly the same thing which we printed earlier. It has some type and some payload. Okay. Right now we are not using some payload. But let me show you an example of payload. Let's say home is there, and now I want to not just increment, but let's say I want to increment by some amount. I want to increment by, let's say, 10 or something. Okay, so I can copy paste this, that is fine. But now this increment by I have to pass, let's say, 10. So I have to increment by 10. So let's keep it here, increment by 10. Okay, so when I click this button, then my handler should dispatch an action, but that action has to be action of incrementing the count variable by 10, not by 1. So this is like normal. So which means that inside this incr reducer, I have to handle that if I pass something, then I have to respect that. If I don't pass anything, then use 1. So that handling we have to do inside this this place. And how to do that? You can see right now that if I click here, then the increment is happening by 1, right? Increment is happening by 1. But if I click here, then also increment is happening by 1, because we have not handled this payload. Even if payload is undefined or payload is 10, in both cases we are calling this. So that's the problem, right? So what we can do is that we know that action.payload, we have something called action.payload. So here we can do something like this, that you know what, if action.payload if action.payload is there, it is something, then use that action.payload. If it is not there, then use 1. Okay, so now you can see that now if nothing is there, which means that see undefined is there, then it is incrementing by 1. But if I click on this, then now it is incrementing by 10, because if payload is 10, then it should use that value as incrementing value rather than 1. So it is incrementing by action.payload amount. Action.payload amount is 10. So that's why it is incrementing by 10. That is fine. And you can understand there is a slight bug here, which is that what if this thing is 0? This thing is 0, then the 0 is falsy, so still it will take 1 rather than 0. So you understand that kind of thing you can do by this sort of null coalescing operator, which I think we learned earlier. So in JavaScript, null coalescing operator is there, where if the left hand side is null or undefined, okay, then only the right side is evaluated. Okay, if it is 0, then it will not. So if action.payload will be 0, then 0 it will be evaluating to 0. But if it is null or undefined, which means that in this case if nothing is passed, which means the action.payload will be undefined, then only in that case this will this whole expression will amount to 1. So anyways, we already learned that. But the main idea, you understood that this sort of optimization we can not optimization, this sort of handling we can do inside our reducers using this payload property if we need. So right now you can see that this thing is working fine. If I want to increment it by 1, then decrement it by 1, increment it by 10, and similarly you can implement decrement by 10 or something. But the whole structure now I think you can understand that how the whole structure is working. At the first go, it might look somewhat overwhelming, but if you see the flow once, then it is something like that. You have a store file, okay, in that you create a slice, and then you say that these reducers are my reducers for this store. So reducer, we'll see that what is slice. Slice is a piece of state, a part of state, right? What if we have multiple slices? So we'll see soon how to handle that, but right now you can see that if you simply have one slice, then you simply pass it like this, and the actions corresponding to this you can export it. And then we have a store. This needs to be configured just once, which we configured here in provide store. The main thing will be actions, which we will be needing more frequently wherever we need to mutate the things. So in this case, we are going to, wherever we are going to mutate, we will need those actions. So the actions dot whatever the function is there, that is action creator. If I call that function, then we get the action which we pass inside dispatch function, which we get from the hook use dispatch. If we, and this is for modifying. If we simply want to consume, we want to see the state, we just want to view the state, then simply use selector and then tell that what state you are interested in, and that state will come in that variable, and that you can see. So here we can see that we can read also and we can modify also. So this basic thing, basic setup we have done, and we have also seen how to handle this whole thing using one slice. We'll see just soon how to work with multiple slices. Okay, the first thing before working with multiple slices is that we want to refactor this code somewhat. So you can understand that this is a slice, there will be multiple slices. So why not create a separate file for each slice rather than keeping everything in one file? Okay, so the first thing we are going to do is that we'll have a counter slice, and we will create a separate file. Okay, file for it. Okay, so what we can do is that counter slice.js. Okay, and inside that we will copy paste this whole thing. So counter slice. Okay, and now now we need this create slice, which is here. So let's copy it from here so we can use it, and then we will export it. So we'll export default counter slice. Okay, and now we simply import this. So we'll import this counter slice from that file we just created. So import counter slice from the file we just created, counter slice. And you can see that with this much refactoring, everything will work as it is. So increment by 1, decrement by 1, increment by 10. Okay, this is working fine. Now what we are going to do is that once we have understood that how this whole setup is working, let's firstly see one small thing, that this is an object, right? Can we simply have a simple primitive type data rather than an object? Before we do that, let's simplify this thing. Actually, this I showed you, this payload thing I showed you, but right now, okay, so let's keep it, not an issue. I just didn't want to complicate the thing. Actually, I want to do something like this. I want to, rather than count 0, I simply want to have 0, and we want to see that whether it works or not. So state.count was 0. Now state is itself is 0. Okay, so now state.count will not be decremented, simply state will be decremented. Okay, and similarly state.count will not be incremented, state will be incremented. So I'm just for now I'm not using payload, I'm just using normal state. Okay, so payload thing you can handle it. I'm just talking about increment and decrement, simple functionalities. And now state.count I'm not using. Then here also I should not say that I'm interested in state.count. So if you simply remove everything, it will not work. So what you have to do is that you simply have to pass something like state arrow state, which means that state.count I'm not interested. I'm interested in directly in state, and that state itself is a primitive type. If you try to work with this much, if you try to, and let's comment this for now because we are not using that payload thing right now. Okay, but if you try to do this much, then you see that yeah, this 0 is coming fine, but when I click, then you see that the error, some sort of error is coming, and that is because, as we said earlier, that sort of automatic detection that you have modified something inside the reducer, that thing happens because of a immutable data structure library called immer. But here that thing will only work when this state is a non-primitive type. Okay, here it is a primitive type. So here if you use a string or null, or here we are using number, so in this case it will not work. So in this case you have to return the updated state, so then only it will work. Sometimes you might get this sort of error, so just let me tell you that in this case you have to return the updated state, and then you can see that this increment and decrement will work. But the best way to use this is not to use initial state as some primitive type, right? It's better to use this as an object. That will be creating less trouble for us always. So let's in that case we don't need to even return new state, because that will be automatically taken care by. Okay, so and now like this if it is state, if it is count, then we don't have to update state, we have to update state.count, which means that this was fine, and similarly this was fine. Okay, so now this is fine, but now we have changed it to count. So when we are using this, then also we have to say that what state I am interested in selecting. I am interested in selecting count, not counter, count only. Okay, so we can see that this increment and decrement is happening correctly. Okay, now let's get into the idea of using multiple selectors. Okay, so multiple slices, and obviously as a result of that multiple selectors will be also there. But what I am trying to say is that let's have something like this. Let's have a user slice. So new file, and we are creating a separate slice called user slice.js, and this will be like almost same as this, but this slice will be called user slice, and this name will be also user. So this is user slice, but this will be not count. This, there will be some name of the user. So let's say name, and then name is, let's say initially the name is nothing, so let's keep it null, and we cannot we're not incrementing decrementing name, rather we are using something called let's say login the user and log out the user. Okay, and what we do is that when we log in, then state.name, we assign it, we change it to whatever the name is passed. So whenever we will pass this login, we will always pass some name, and with that name this name will be updated, which means that whatever the payload name we are passing, the user will be logged in with that name, and when we are logging out, then we will reset it to null. So whatever was the earlier situation, name was null, we are resetting it to name null when we do logout. So this is like simple. Generally this sort of thing here will there will be a lot of validation, and let's say somebody is trying to log in using username and password. We will do all of that here, but I'm saying that as the final step you will do something like this. So I'm just showing you a toy login application using this sort of thing, because this keeping the logged in user across the whole application, that is also one of the use cases of global state management, right? Okay, so we have created this slice. Now we have to use this slice. How to use this slice? The same way which we were trying to use counter slice. So instead of counter slice, now we also have to use our user slice. So let's call it user slice, and then there are a few differences. So you see right now there was just a simple one slice, so I simply passed it as directly like this, right? But now there are multiple slices, so what we have to do is that we have to create a separate name, and we have to uh, have separate reducer for each of the names, which means that rather than having directly like this was a counter reducer, right? So rather than directly like this, we have to use something like, let's keep a name counter, and in that you pass this. Similarly, have a separate name called user, and in that you pass something like user slice dot reducer. So this you have to do. So this is the one change you have to do, right? The second change you have to do is that we also have to get actions. Okay, we also have to get actions. So here also we have to use something like this. Let's have it counter, and in that we will have counter dot actions, and then we will have user, and in that we will have user slice dot actions. But did we define user slice dot actions? Yes, in any slice. So you can see that in counter slice, what was the actions? Automatically when you pass actions, then this reducers actions corresponding to this reducers were automatically created, isn't it? Like counter slash incr, counter slash decr, you remember, right? Similarly here also, when user slice dot actions you are using somewhere on this user slice, then automatically user slash login and user slash logout, that type actions of that type will be automatically created. We'll see that in a similar manner. Okay, but you understand, if we do this, this is fine, and here you could have destructured it also, you can understand. So you understand that you could have done something like this also here. So rather than creating separate names, you could have created something like this, comma, and you destructure this also. Okay, and then rather than using this, you are using this. But then the difference will be that whatever the current way of using slices is there. So the current way of using slices is what? Slices mean actions, is that actions dot incr, actions dot decr. The same way you can keep on using this. But if you use something like this, then actions dot incr will not work. But you have, because I have created another object, so now you have to use actions dot counters dot incr, and this is a better way. Why? Because let's say inside counter slice also you created some abc reducer, and here also you have created abc reducer. Then if you use this way, then like then they will override each other, and that's why this is not a good way. If you're using multiple reducer, this is not a good way. This is the better way. Okay, and then the only thing you have to change is that wherever you are using these actions, you have to use these particular namespaces also, which we are currently using. So in this case, in counter slice and user slice, obviously automatically it will come. The main modifications will be where we are using these actions. We are using these actions in home, right? So in home, actions.incr will not be there, rather actions.counter.incr, because we are doing that on counter slice. Okay, so actions.counter.incr, and similarly here also actions.counter.decr, and let's enable this also because this will work properly. Actions.counter.increment by 10, and let's come uncomment this also. So that is this is fine, right? One final change we have to do is that while using actions we have changed this, but while selecting state we also have to change, right? So the current earlier we simply used reducer and directly we assigned this, but right now this is again an object, so counter this thing. So here also we have to change this, so it will be state dot counter dot count. Okay, firstly let's see whether this is working or not. So you can see that increment by 1, decrement by 1, increment by 10, all these are working. Now just pay more attention to this state dot counter dot count. What is this? State dot counter, which means that give me this reducer, that is fine. But inside this reducer in the counter slice, you see that again this is an object. So inside that also, what piece of inside this slice also, what actually what state data you are interested in, so that is count. Okay, so that's why here state.counter.count is there. Now again, if you think that I'll not recommend that, but again, if you use something like this, that oh no, this will not be an object, this will be like only directly this thing. Okay, and then again, what I said you earlier, that directly incrementing and decrementing this thing. Okay, if you are doing something like that, then again the same issue will happen. So first of all, in order to use this, now I will not use state.counter.count, because state.counter itself is the state. State.counter itself is the state. This is primitive. There is no object. So here there is no need of doing that. And then once we are updating it, then again we will get the same error, because this is a primitive type, and if you are modifying something, then you have to return that state. Okay, and if you return that state properly, the new state, then it will work fine. But again, you understand that it's better, as I suggested earlier, it's better to simply use object, and in that case you can directly mutate also, so that will be non-confusing. Okay, so that is fine. The only thing is that once you do this, then proper reducers, you have to modify those particular variables. That is one thing. And whenever you are using, then you have to particularly say that what state I'm interested in. And again, if you're using like state counter dot count, that is one way, right? That is one way. But another way you could have done is that no, I will use simply state dot count, and maybe I'll destructure it. Something like this. So it is now returning count, whole counter object rather than simply count, and then I'm from that I'm destructuring this count data which I need, and I'm playing around with that only. So this is also you can do. And again, I'm renaming it because I have always used everywhere used counter. If you simply use destructure and don't rename it, then simply you have to use count. Other than that, it's fine, same thing. Anyways, I'm more aligned towards using something like this. Okay, whatever the variable I'm interested in, let's take that. If from the same state dot counter, let's say you are fetching multiple things, then why to write multiple lines? In that case, you could destructure here, but in this case it's fine. Okay, so this is the way in which it's working. Okay, so yeah, so this is fine for using multiple slices, but we have just shown you that multiple slices, how to configure multiple slices, but the second slice, which is user slice, still we have not used it. Okay, so let's do the implementation of the user slice. We have already done the implementation as such for the creation of slice, but while how to use this slice, that we have not implemented. Okay, so let's use this. So like right now we were using this counter slice inside this home page. Let's use the user slice on user page. Okay, so on the user page we are already using this counter thing, and counter thing is not working properly, because here also we have to change counter state.counter.count, and now it will work properly. So you can see that whatever the counter is 21, here also it is 21, that is fine. But now we are more interested in using the user slice. So for that, like we were using we were selecting counter, here we will be selecting user. So state dot user dot name. Okay, and here we can say, let's say it is user. You can call it user name also, but I'm just calling it user. So what is this? I'm taking the state.user reducer. I'm taking the state.user reducer, and in this user reducer, it is corresponding to user slice, and in this user slice I have a data called name, and that name data I'm interested in, right? And again, I told you earlier, you could have done something like this also. You could do something like this also. You could destructure like this also. Okay, so essentially from the state.user state, I am restructuring this piece of data, name, and right now it will be null, and that's why even if I print this, so let's print this here. Let's say user colon, and then so let's print this user, whatever is there, and we'll see that nothing will be printed. Nothing is printed because user is null. Null will not be rendered on the browser, right? So this is null, but let's do some actions. Okay, and we know that we have already defined some actions, which is login and logout. Let's do that. What we can do is that we can have something like this, where we are saying that, you know what, if user is there, means it is not null, then obviously you are already logged in. But if you're not logged in, which is currently the case, if it is null, then this second part of ternary operator will be used, where I'll be shown the login button. So I have to handle this. So login is equal to, and you can see that this thing is there. And similarly, let's implement logout also. But both the things we are not right now, we have not implemented, but at least the button will be visible now. So you can see that this login button is visible, and when I click, nothing happens because I'm not doing anything. What I'm interested in is that when I click on this, then I have to change the user. Okay, so let's say when I click on login, then again from so like in here, home, we can see that from React Redux we imported this use dispatch, right? So similarly from here also we'll import this use dispatch, and then we can have that thing dispatch is equal to use dispatch, and then we will use this dispatch function wherever we need. So right now here we need, and what is the action? So here, like in home we imported the actions, here also we'll import the actions. And now, like in home, now actions.counter.incr, correspondingly we are using this namespace because in store we configured it like actions.counter. Similarly, now we will be using actions.user.whatever action. So in user slice we have login and logout, right? So similarly here we will use something like actions.user.login. And the important thing is that in login the payload was also used, right? You can see in user slice payload was used. This is the thing which will be assigned to the name. Okay, so we can't pass it empty, we have to pass it something. So let's say I want to log in a user called Alex, so username will be Alex. So this is what we have to do. And in logout, what we have to do is that we have to simply call the logout function. So rather than login, I have to call the logout function. So actions.user.logout, which we defined here, this we will call. And when we will call this, again the name will become null. So here again name will become null. So now you can clearly see that this is currently null, and that's why it is not rendered. When I click on login, then you can see that this is now Alex, and login button has changed to logout because now this is truthy, and that's why logout button is shown. When I click on logout button, then this action will be called, which will again set the username to null. So when I click on this again, then this username will be again set to null, and that's why it is disappeared. And again, I showed you a simple thing here. Rather than printing user here, you could have done it completely separately somewhere else. So let's say I'm just changing the login logout state here, but I'm not actually using the this thing here. Let's say I'm rather using it in some header. Okay, so in header, let's say yeah, something like this. But then again I have to use the same way. So from I have to import use selector. So use selector from React Redux, and then from this use selector I have to get this user. Okay, this user, actually which state I'm interested in, that is the thing. So I'm interested in state dot user dot name. Okay, and then you can see that when I log in, then hello Alex is there because I'm printing this hello user, and when I'm log out, then this thing is gone. So yeah, this is pretty much it. In this case, we are able to see that now since this user is logged in, so wherever you go, you can see that the data is already there. In fact, let's say I'm coming here, you can see that the counter is 21. I here come here and decrement it to 20. Then since it is global state, wherever we go, it is available inside that. So yeah, this is pretty much it, the global state app implementation using Redux, in particular using Redux toolkit. And you might see this syntax somewhat different from some other places on the internet, because this is the most recent syntax, this is the most recent style of and the recommended by Redux team. This is the most recent style of using Redux. But if somewhere you see like create slice or like combine reducer, that sort of syntax, if you see, then those are like older syntax. And going forward, you should be comfortable if whatever I mentioned in this video, if that much you are comfortable with that, then you should be good to go with the most recent syntax of Redux. Okay, so that will be all for this video. In the next video, I'll be discussing how to use global state or app level state management, how to do that using using RxJS, and that is my favorite way, because still Redux.js, using Redux.js we have learned, but still this is somewhat more cumbersome. If the project is somewhat big, then this slightly complicated setup is worth it. But if your application is not that big, then I prefer Redux. Instead of Redux, I prefer using RxJS, but again, it is your choice. So that global state management using RxJS, that I will be discussing in the next video. So that's all for this one. Thank you.